In this video, I want to teach you how to create HTML lists. And if you don't know what that is, it's just a way of listing items in a web page. So you can either list items in an orderly manner, or you list them in an unordered manner. Okay, so we're going to learn how to do that in HTML. And then with HTML list, we have two types of HTML list, which I actually mentioned with the definition, but I'm going to mention that again. We have the first one is actually ordered list, and then the second one is unordered list, and we're going to learn how to build the two of them in this video. But for me to just give a kind of a hint on how they actually done, we are making use of unordered list. It's when you are trying to list items in a way that does not actually require a stepwise approach to be able to list them. That's unordered list. Okay, if you, let's say for instance, someone will, for a person to be actually called an educated person, the person will have to go through 3 different schools, which is maybe something like secondary school, university, let's say kindergarten, and then something like secondary school. You see that the way that I'm actually listing them, I'm listing them in an unordered way. Okay, but if you want it to be in such a way that the person has to go through kindergarten first, after kindergarten you go to primary school, and then after primary school you go to secondary school, then before you proceed to the university, this is just basically called ordered way of going through the school system to be able to be called an educated person. Okay, and then with that of the this is just basically what is actually called a ordered list. Okay, because I named them in order. Okay, so then if you want to like create something like unordered list, it's really very simple. You are just going to use something like a UL to be able to create that, and then in combination with a tag that is also called a LI. LI stands for list item, and UL stands for unordered list. Okay, then if you want to also build that of the ordered list, you can use something like OL tag, and in combination with the list item, which is LI, to be able to create them. And they are really very simple. So if you don't know how to build them, it's really very simple. I'm going to teach you how to do that in this video. And without wasting more time, I want to get into my computer right now and then begin to learn how to build that from the scratch. So let's do that right now. So for us to demonstrate the list item right now, all you need to do is to fire up your favorite editor and then throw in your HTML boilerplate, which is this right here. So you can pause the video and then type it out. And what you basically need to do right now is to click on file, and I want to save this file to our folder, which is HTML and CSS located on the desktop. And what I'm going to do right now is to just type the name of the file in here. So this is just basically going to be called let's call this HTML underscore list dot HTML. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and then save that, and then I want to throw in my title in here, which we have been doing before now. So you should be able to do that on your own. So this is title, and I'm going to just call this HTML list, and I can close out the title right here. Okay, so this is going to be title, and then save that. Of course, with that, we've gotten our title right there, and we can actually maybe put this on a separate line. So let's tab this over, and I think this looks a lot neater. And that is just that, guys. So the next thing we need to do is within this place right now, I want to throw in my h1, and I'm going to just call this HTML list, and we can close out that right here by just doing our h1, and then it's actually closed. Then to create the first one right now, remember that we have two types of lists. Okay, we have two types of list, and the first one is actually let's put this in a paragraph. I'm going to just say this is going to be let's say two types of lists, and the first one is actually going to be it's actually called the unordered list, and the second one is called the ordered list. Okay, so let's just basically have that in a table the way that it is right now, I mean in a paragraph. And if we'll save this right now, we want to check that out on our browser, which we can basically, if we go to our files and folder in here, we can actually find that right here, which we call the HTML list, and then open that up, and you see that we have the title in there, and then we have this basically on the page. Okay, so if we had done what is actually called a list before now, we could have rearranged this in a better way, but for now we just basically want to have it the way that it is right now. Okay, so what I'm going to basically do right now is just break this line down. So I'm going to just put BR right here. All right, so I'm going to just basically break that line down right now. All right, Okay, and you can also in turn break this one if you want. So let's also break this particular one down. So this is going to be BR right there. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is to start working on the list item itself, which the first one I want to work on right now is going to be that of the unordered list, which I'm going to just create. Let me just do something like H2 right here, and then call that unordered list, and we can just close out the H2 right here, and we can start within this particular place. So to define the unordered list, we use UL. We've mentioned that before now, and we can close out the UL right here, okay, which we already established that UL means unordered list. Okay, so that is just what that is. And within the unordered list that we have right now, we can start spelling out the items that we want. Okay, so we do that with list item, which is li, and let's say that we are starting off our university education as the first step to getting educated. Okay, so let's call this a university. Okay, so we have that right there, university, and we can close out the li right there. All right, so we have university right there. So let's go ahead and then copy that. I want to paste that maybe 3 more times. 1, 2, 3 right there. Okay, let's say after university right there, that the next thing that we're going to have is something like secondary school, and let's put that in here. So this is going to be secondary. Some people actually call this a college, so some countries call that college. So let's put that college in bracket, and we can just put something like school right here. Okay, and after that we can proceed. Let's say that the next step is to actually go through primary school, so I'm going to just say primary. And I know that some countries also call this something like elementary, so let's put that in bracket and just call that elementary school. And let's make this caps lock, and let's make sure we close out this brackets in here, guys. Not really here, so it has to be closed right here. And the final thing that we have in right there is actually the kindergarten. Okay, so let's say that the final step right here is going to be kindergarten. All right, so let's put that right there, kindergarten. Okay, so some people basically they call this something like pre-nursery, so you can just kind of put something like pre-nursery right there. Okay, basically just things of that nature. This may be different depending on the country that you're actually coming from, but let's just go with this. So we have this in no particular order, and what I'm going to do right now is that if I save this right now and then go to our browser and then refresh, you're going to see something. You see that we have lists of we basically have another list right here. And I think it will be a very nice thing if we add something in here, paragraph that can just say something like to be called an educated person, let's say, in the world. So I basically believe that you guys understand what I'm actually getting at. Okay, so for you to be called an educated person, you need to go through all of these things that are actually here, but I'm listing them in a way that they are not maintaining any order. Okay, so they are not in any particular order. That's what that is, and that's what is it called, unordered list actually stands for. Okay, so it's going to basically list all the items for you, all the things that you need to actually go through to be able to be called an educated person, but then it's not actually like a kind of a listing them in any particular order. Okay, all right, so that is just that, and I hope that you guys kind of understand what I'm trying to explain right here. Okay, I may not have the right word, but just understand that we're just basically listing the items in no particular order. There are no stepwise approach to becoming educated in the world today based on the list that we have in here, even though I know that if you want to be called an educated person, you have to start from pre-nursery or kindergarten, and then you move on to the university. Okay, so that's just what this is. And then as far as the markers here are actually concerned, if you take a look at it here, you're going to see something like a dot, black dot right here, showing that it's a kind of a listing the item, and then it's in an unordered way. Okay, so you can decide the type of marker. Okay, these things that we have in here, these dots are actually called a marker. So if you want to change the marker, you can actually do that. It's really possible to do it. And if you want to do that, if we go back to our development environment and want to do that, we're basically going to have to do that within this place. Okay, and that's just basically with the help of something like CSS that you can actually use to kind of decide that. But before we go on to do that right now, I want to mention that we have something like a disk. The one we have already right there is actually called a disk. This one that we have in here, so that particular type is called a disk. And we also have another one that is actually called a circle. we'll have another one called a square, and then we'll have the one that does not actually if you want the one that does not actually have something like any marker at all, you can actually do that. Okay, so let's demonstrate that in our tag right here. So if you want to do that, it's actually CSS, and we're going to do inline CSS right here. So this is going to be style, and then the property that it's actually need, I think I mentioned that it's actually called a list dash style dash tag. Okay, and you can set that to a particular value. Okay, so let's say this time around that this one is actually going to be, I think we already have square, I mean a disk already. So if we do this C for disk, we can actually check that and see whether it's actually going to change. Okay, so if we go in here and then we refresh, see that nothing actually changes right there. Okay, but if we go in, and that is because that's actually the default. Okay, by default it's actually set to disk, and if we want to change that right now, let's say we want to change it to something like a circle, we can actually do that by changing this to circle. Okay, so if I put that, change that to circle, and I go back and I refresh, you see that this changes to circle, right? So changes to circle. So remember, what was there is actually disk. So if we take this away, just like I mentioned, it's actually by default is disk that is actually there. I want you to identify the difference. See that? Then if I bring back what I just removed right now, save that, refresh again, you see that it's now circle. Okay, so that means we have circle as one of the markers that we can actually use. Okay, and after that we have another one that is actually called so what I'm going to do right now is I want to copy this right now and then paste it on the next line. And I want to change the style right here. So instead of using circle right now, I want to go ahead and then make use of something like this time around, let this be something like square. So I'm going to change this to square and save that. And if I go back to the browser right now and refresh, you notice that we now have square, okay, as the marker right here. That is just how to get that one. And the next one that we have is, let's say we do not actually even need any marker right now. And basically, I think we should also, let me copy this line and then put it on the first line right there, paste that. And I want to take this away. Okay, I want to, or let's just change this to something like, let's go ahead and call that disk, which is the default. Okay, so I just want you to keep this for reference purpose, see how that is actually displaying. All right, so after that we have another one that I want to like bring in right now, which I'm going to just basically paste right here. So if you want the one that does not actually have any marker at all, you can do that, and the value for that is actually none. So you can set that to none. So if I set this to none, you're going to notice that it's going to print that, but then it's not going to have any marker at all. Okay, and I think we should just use something like ruler bars to separate these things that we have in here. So I'm going to just do HR, separate that, add another HR down here to separate that, and we can also add a HR down here. Okay, so this is basically HR, just to kind of separate all these things for ourselves. Okay, so you can actually label them however you want them to be, so that you can really understand that. Okay, so let me label that. All right, so I basically have that labeled out. So I'm kind of designating this right now. So you just take a look at what I just added. These few lines, I added these. I also added this particular one. And then if you go to the tapping there, you see that I also added this right here. And then finally, I added this particular line in here. Okay, this particular one. Okay, which is for disk. And then if we save this and then go to our browser, and it's not something really so different, it's just trying to label all of this. So this one means that the list items that we're having here is actually using disk, and then this one is actually using circle, and then this one is using square, and then the last one is actually using a list marker that is actually called a none. All right, so that's just what that is. So let's proceed now to the next level. All right, so the next thing I want to work on right now is going to be called that of the ordered list. So I'm going to put a ruler bar in here, and then I want to add something like H2 right here. So this is going to be H2 or H3, whatever I want it to actually be. So this can be ordered lists, and we can go ahead and close the H2 right here. Okay, so and if you want to like create order the list, you can do it using OL, which stands for order the list. Okay, so I'm going to just do OL right here, and we can go ahead and then close that down here. So this is going to be OL, and then within this particular OL, we can now begin to list our items. And to list that, we are still going to make use of this LI that we have in here, and I'm going to just basically copy that and then get that pasted on this particular place. Okay, and if I save this the way that it is right now, of course it's actually going to print these things out in an orderly manner, and then the default is actually numerals. Okay, it's going to be in digits, that's numbers. So I'm going to just save this, and just for us to take a look at that for taking a look at that purpose anyway. So I have that saved, and if I scroll down right now, and you see that we are on the section that is actually called the ordered list, and you see that those lists are actually numbered in in an orderly manner. So it ranges from number 1, 2, 3 to 4. Okay, so it's now your work to rearrange them the way they're actually supposed to be. Okay, so I believe that the kindergarten should be the first one right here. So we need to call this, put it at the very top right here, and then followed by this particular one that we're having here. So let's make sure that we rearrange everything the way that they should actually be. Okay, so the last one is right here. So this is going to be in this way. Okay, so you have to go through kindergarten. After that, you get into your primary school, and after that, you get into secondary school. Then before you actually proceed to the university. Okay, so if I save this right now, then view that in our browser, you'll notice that it is now actually in the right order. Okay, so you need to go through this particular way to be able to be called an educated person. Okay, so that's just what it means to have order the list. Okay, so you can actually label this any way you want it to actually be. Okay, so for instance, let's just, if we put something like a paragraph in here, and we can just say something like the right order of getting educated in the world. Okay, so let's assume that we label that way. So that's just basically what it should be right now. And then before we can actually proceed, remember that by default, if you take a look at this, which we'll have on the browser right here, you see that those items are actually arranged, and then it's starting from 1 to 4 right there, which means it's actually using numerals. Okay, numbers, that's digits. So if you want to change that type, it's actually possible. If you wanted to use something like ABCD, it's possible. So you can do that with an attribute that is actually called a type. So I'm going to just go ahead and set this now to something like A. Okay, so I want it to start using alphabet. So I will set the attribute called a type, and I will set the property to that of the A. So if I save this right now and go back to my browser and I refresh, you see that we have that right there. Okay, so we have A, B, C, D right there. So if add more items, it's actually going to continue. So if I copy and then paste this particular line on the next line right there and save that, if I take a look at that on the browser, you see that E will actually come in right there. Okay, so take a look at that. Okay, but we do not actually need that line, so I'm going to just take that away because we don't need it. All right, so that's just what that is. So what I'm going to do right now is I want to copy this right now and then paste that on the next line, and we should have something like a horizontal roller bar again right here. Okay, so I'm going to copy and paste that, and then I'm going to change the first one to alphabets, numerals, which is not 1, 2, or through to that. And then the second one is actually going to be making use of this. All right, so if we do that right now, all right, so we can also decide these things that we have in here, like this particular list item that will have A right here. If you take a look at the result, you see that it's actually displaying in capital letters. We can actually decide whether we want it to be in lowercase letters or uppercase letters. Okay, we can also do that. But before I actually go ahead to do that right now, I want to label these things out again. I'm going to put this right here. So this is going to be digits. Let's call this digits, or numbers. Let's just basically call that numbers. Okay, and then I want to copy that particular line in here or down here. I want to just say something like that this one actually makes use of alphabets. So this is going to be let's call that uppercase letters. Okay, so this is going to be letters, and the next one that we're going to do right now is going to be lowercase letters. So I'm going to copy this right now and then put that down here. Of course, I'm going to put my HR before I actually paste that. So I'm going to paste that in here, and I want to change this right here from what it is right now to lowercase letter. And I'm going to see that the last thing that we're going to have in there is going to be making use of lowercase letters. So let's change this to this is going to be lower case letters. Okay, all right, so let's go back and then refresh our browser right here, and then if you scroll down, you notice that under the list, under this place, we have numbers, and if you take a look at the result, we have numbers in there. This one has uppercase letters. If you take a look at the results, it has uppercase letters, and then for the lowercase letters, you see that we also have that right there. Okay, so that's just basically how that works. And again, there's one more thing I need to also show. If you don't want to use this particular type, you can also use things like Roman figures. Okay, or Roman numerals. I don't know what that is actually called, but let me just demonstrate that, and I believe you guys will understand that. So let's say I'm going to change this to Roman figures or Roman numerals. Anyhow, let's call that numerals, figures. Okay, and if we want to do that, we can go ahead and then let's say that this is going to actually start with I right there, and if we save this right now and we'll check let's check our browser, we'll have that, I believe we'll have that saved. If we scroll down, you see that it starts with Roman figures. Okay, so this is I and IV right there. Okay, so that's just how that is actually working. So let's enter, let's make sure we separate this right here with horizontal ruler bar, and that is just that, guys. So that is just that. So down here you can also separate what is right there with a horizontal ruler bar, and then you can copy this. Remember that we have this in lowercase letter right now, and we can also, maybe within this place, we can just call this, let's call that, this is lowercase, let's call that lowercase figures. And then down here, if I copy and paste what I had earlier, we can change this to Roman figures, and in bracket we can have let's say uppercase. Okay, uppercase figures. You can basically, I'm just trying to label these things out so that you can always understand it anytime you want. So if you change this from what it is right now to capital letter I, and then save the changes. If we check our browser and then refresh, then let's get down to that section to see that we will not have that in uppercase um, Roman figures. Okay, so have that in uppercase Roman figures right now. All right, so I think we are basically actually doing well. So let's do one more thing right here, and that is actually going to be based on what we call HTML description list. And to do that right here, we can a kind of let's just try to do that down here. We can just try to describe that. The tag for that is actually called a DL, which stands for description list. Okay, so we can just start off with something like DL, and then we can close out that right here, which is DL. And within this particular DL, we're going to have some data within this particular DL. Okay, so the first one we're going to have, I'm going to just basically copy this thing that we have in here. So I'm going to copy the first one. And then within this place, I'm going to just put that within our DT right there and paste that. And then we can go ahead and then close the DT right there. So this is going to be DT like this. Okay. And then within this particular DT, if I want to like explain quite a few things in here, I can actually do that. And what this is basically going to do for us is this. So we have a kindergarten right here. We want to have something like a description that actually kind of describe this kindergarten that we have in here. And to do that, we use something like DD to do that. So there's a tag that is actually called a DD. So I'm going to just do DD right here, and we can close out the DD almost immediately. And within this DD, we can do some explanation. Okay, so if I put something like this in here right now, we can say something like this is for kids under let's say under school age. Okay, so children that are under school age, they are really not supposed to like go to school at that age, so they go to a place called a kindergarten or pre-nursery. Okay, so that's just the what explanation I can actually give you right now. And then for this particular one, we can copy this and then get down here. And what I'm going to do right now with that one is that let's go ahead and then do a DT right here again. So this is going to be DT, and then I can paste what I just copied. We want to take away this list anyway. That LI there has to be taken away, and we can go ahead and then close the DT right here. So this is going to be DT, and then we can go ahead and then kind of describe it. Okay, so I'm going to copy this right here down to this line. Let's tab that over, and we can say that this is for kids that are within school age. Okay, so I want to save this right now and then take a look at that to see how that is actually looking so far. Okay, so if we go to our browser and then we'll refresh, and we're going to notice that if I scroll down right here, you see that something is actually happening in here. Okay, so we have kindergarten right here, and then we're trying to describe kindergarten, and I've seen quite a lot of note that is actually displayed in this particular manner. So I just basically want you to understand that if you see something like primary or elementary school, and then there is a description for what that is, okay, or for whom that is actually meant for down here, that's just basically what that is actually doing for us right there. And I believe that you guys kind of understand that, right? All right, so that is just that. So you can label that, just put something like a data list at the top of that place. I can actually do that with you right now. So let's just put a paragraph and just call this something like HTML. Let's call this description list right there. Okay, so we can go ahead and close out the p tag just for the label sake. Okay, all right guys, so the next thing we want to do right now is to let's do what is called a nested HTML list. So I'm gonna just let's put a tag in here called this history, and let's call that nested HTML list right there, and we can close the h3 down here. Okay, so to create what is actually called a nested HTML list, it means having a list inside of a list. That's what it means to have nested HTML list, and we're going to demonstrate that right now so that you guys can understand that. So I'm going to put something like HR to demarcate the previous one right there. And then down here where we're working on the nested, we can just throw in our UL right here. And then let's just go ahead and then close out our UL. And within our UL right here, I want to create my first list. So I'm going to just say something like LI right here. So this is going to be LI. And we can do something like home right there, and we can close the LI right there. Okay, and after that, if we want to, we can add another item right here. So let's call that something like, this is going to be LI, and let's call that about, and let's close out this right here. So this is going to be LI, and that is it for those two items. We can I want to tab this over so that it will be readable. Okay, so I have that tabbed over to that particular place where it is right now. And next thing I want to do right now is that I want to nest another set of items into this particular place. Okay, and probably let me just change this from what it is right now to something like, let's call this products. So I think it will make a lot more sense, because there's a picture I want to create inside of your head with what I want to do right now. All right, so within this place right now, let's create something like a UL again, and within this particular UL, we're going to need quite a few things. So first of all, I need to close out this particular UL right here, and then in that we need to create few lists right here. Okay, so I'm going to just do LI right there, and let's say that I offer services like web dev. So I'm just say web dev, and let's call that LI, not paragraph. And the next thing that I actually offer is something like digital marketing. So we can just do another LI right here, and we can just say something like digital marketing, and we can actually close out the LI right there. Okay, and just like that, we can get down here, and if we want to have another list, we can actually have that. And this particular list that I'm about to create right now belongs to the first list that I just kind of created. So let's just call this something like services. Okay, no, let's not call that services. So let's call that something like feedback. So I just basically want to save this, and then let's take a look at how that actually looks in our browser. And then if we take a look at that in our browser, you're going to see that we have a list in here. The first one is actually called home. The second one is called product. But under product, we have web dev, we have digital marketing, and then down here, which is on the same line with these two things that we have in here. So this means that we also have something like feedback down here, which is under this particular element. Okay, but then these two things that we have in here, what this is actually doing is this. So I don't know if you have ever seen something like a drop-down menu on website before. It displays in such a way that these three things now, this particular home, product, and that of the feedback, they are going to just display in line with each other. So this particular one will be hidden by default. It's only when you now bring your mouse button close to the product right here that these two lines will actually kind of a display. Okay, so that's just the picture that I want to create in your head. So this is just the basis of how to build something like a drop-down menu. All right, so that's just what that is. And of course, we're going to build such a thing in the future. Okay, but this, I just want you to kind of begin to cultivate that mindset that this is just how to actually build that. Okay, so and we can use list unordered list to actually build something like menu bars. Okay, we can actually do that. All right, guys, so I think we should just basically stop it right here. We've actually done quite a lot, and it took a lot more time than I even expected. Okay, so we should just basically stop it right here, and then in the next one we're going to do something different than the one that we have just actually done here. Okay, so I would have loved to like build something like a menu bar with you guys right here, but that's way more too advanced than what you should just actually be taking a look at right now. Okay, so we basically need to just kind of do quite a few things, because the building a menu bar is going to involve quite a lot of CSS, okay, which you are not actually familiar with right now. But just know that this is part of the things that you can actually use to build menu bars if you want to actually build that. Okay, combine that with something like an anchor tag to be able to do that. All right, so thanks for watching, and if you like this video, just try to give it a like, and then I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye for now.